We are here to welcome Kevin, and this is just a sheer delight for me because I do teach Congress class. I have taught elections classes before, but there's nothing like really hearing it straight from the source, somebody who has really been involved right in the production of elections and knows it inside out. So we're really honored to have you here with us today. I know that there are lots of different ways we could approach this particular event. But one of the things that we wanted to do was just give you all, if you're in the audience, a sense of who Kevin Runbeck is. He brings nearly 5 decades of election experience to the job that he holds now. That is, he runs Runbeck Election Services. It was founded by Kevin and his father, and they have taken that company from a very small printing company to now a full service election printing equipment and software company. And they do at this current time provide election services for over 20 states and a third of the country's electorate. So if you're getting something in your mail, it might have been printed or at least at some level been touched by their firm. Kevin has driven the development of an executive team of top performers specifically in the election industry. And his team really just delivers all kinds of great services in this field of elections. So one of the things that one of Kevin's priorities and also mine is to make sure that we have a good understanding of what we're heading to as this election just looms. And we are so close now. We're within just a couple of months really of casting ballots. And so we're looking to Kevin to tell us a little more about what kinds of things are happening in the election through his elections. Again, just to kind of burnish his credentials a little more. He has been awarded all kinds of achievement awards, the Western States Printing Alliance for his contribution to the graphic arts industry, but also supporting educational programs. And in 2018 was inducted into the Printing Industries of America's Ben Franklin Honor Society, comprised of industry leaders who have made lasting contributions to advancing print and graphic communication. So, Kevin, I assume you're coming to us from Arizona. Is that correct?
I am sitting in my office in Phoenix with the airport right behind me. You
and the air
used to be able
conditioning
to
running.
see planes coming and going out that window, but these days, not so many.
Right. That's true. There's such a slowdown in the economy. You can witness it firsthand.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, I would love to actually start with this question. I have a whole bunch of questions that we could ask, but how do you see the current COVID crisis affecting elections? I mean, here you have the airport right behind you. You can see the economy slowing down. How has this affected elections in your industry?
Well, all you have to do is turn on the news, and you know that everyone's talking about this access to elections, and while we in the West are very used to vote by mail, a lot of states that don't do all mail, while Washington and Oregon and Colorado, Hawaii are all vote by mail states. California is going to be, for this next election, they are going to vote all by mail, although they're still going to have polling places, and I believe they're going to have vote centers for drop-ins or walk-ins. But really what we're trying to do is help the middle states and the East Coast cope with something they've never dealt with before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where most of the media is paying attention to right now, the challenges and adjusting at the last minute to a new style of voting. COVID is causing a lot of problems. I mean, obviously the health impact is immense, but the fear of being exposed to it, one of the things that kept elections going was volunteer people to work the polls and to work a lot of this temporary work for the last month of the election. And the majority of them were our senior citizens. So, one of the challenges we had before is helping them get involved with new technology, which is a little more challenging for us silver hairs. I would have silver hair if you saw hair, but the challenge is we get to a point where new technology is a little onerous, and and we choose not to. So we've overcome that in a lot of places, only now to deal with the fact no one is signing up to help. And so one of the messages is right now, if you're young and healthy, now's the time to get involved in the elections. Call your county and volunteer, or they actually pay. It's not great pay, but
But it's
you know,
pay. Where you
it's
don't
beer
have to
money.
volunteer. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Right.
but then the fact that everyone's scrambling to do vote by mail and they don't have the infrastructure to do it smoothly. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean that it's going to be fraudulent. It isn't. Fraud is an overt act to do something illegal. So we're not seeing much of that at all. In fact, the only people that have been actually prosecuted for tampering with vote by mails was a political operative out of North Carolina.
Hmm.
Um, and then the one-offs, which really don't impact elections at all, where someone, gets the ballot of their dead father and decides to try to vote it, and we
Right.
usually catch those and things like that. But it's not impactful to the election, but it
Right.
is impactful to the dialogue and all the conspiracy theories that are floating around right now and are being promoted, frankly, to cause concern or doubt in the outcome. And
Right.
that's what I really am worried about, is we've never seen such a huge effort to discredit the process.
I agree with you. I think this is a true concern for me as well. I'm watching and hearing all of this dialogue about how fraudulent mail-in elections are, despite the evidence that they are not, is really alarming. And so, if we should be alarmed about anything, it's about the dialogue rather than the actual process, right?
Yes,
Um, yeah,
we now get our news from so many sources that are more opinion pieces than news, and it's
yeah,
hard to discern which is actual fact and which is hyperbole to create a toxic environment, frankly, for
right,
political gain.
right.
Um, we use the term voter fraud, or that's been thrown around a lot. And the crime that is described, though, is not voters committing a fraud, it's election fraud. And
Hmm.
those are always perpetrated by political operatives trying to manipulate the outcome.
Right.
So,
And this is like you say, it can be prosecuted. It is prosecuted
Mhm.
if it's discovered. Most people don't want to risk actually committing a crime. So, yeah, this is a
there
interesting.
was some discussion about illegal aliens voting um, in the election. Well, first off, they have to register to vote. That's really hard if you're not a citizen. But even if you could overcome that, what I found interesting, or in 2008, we were asked to do an election for the Mexican government, and they wanted to allow expatriates and illegals living in the United States to vote in their presidential election. So they contacted us and contracted with us to print, I think it was around 4 million ballots that we would distribute. And I'd say, well, how are you distribute them? And he said, well, we're going to do it through our consulates. And I said, well, how are you going to get people to register to vote? Well, they're going to go to the consulate and sign up. And then over the course of the next 4 months, they kept calling back and lowering the number of ballots they were going to need until
Mm,
they finally just said, forget it. We're not going to do
mm,
it. And what that really illustrates is, if you're in this country illegally, the last thing you want to do is draw attention to yourself. Are you going to
right,
risk being deported right now just to do one vote?
right.
No, it's
No,
not happening. That's
right. It's a
so
very good
anyway,
point.
that's one of the ongoing myths that we have to deal with.
Yes. And so tell us a little bit about how you actually came to into this industry. What's the story maybe of how your family came into the business of elections?
Well, that's I want to set the record straight, because you said almost 50 years. I actually, you can say that because I was working on elections when I was a sophomore in high school.
Or maybe
So
when you were five.
no, I actually, my uncle, with some of his ex-IBM friends, started a company in the late 60s called Computer Election Systems out of Berkeley, California. And they were using the already antiquated punch card technology from IBM to create a automatic tabulation system and that was the vote. They called it the Votomatic. It was the punch cards, and you know, if you remember all the butterfly ballots from 2000 and whatnot, that was that old system.
Right.
Well, we got involved because my uncle had sold a few small counties in Arizona back in 1972, and he called it his brother-in-law, my dad, who was had a little boutique advertising agency at the time here, and said, "Can you help me for a couple of months?" And literally, that's how we got our start. And it wasn't until after I graduated from Redlands, barely, by the way, and failed at flipping houses in Palm Springs in 1980 when the market crashed, that I came back to Arizona and joined my dad, and the two of us with a secretary would every other year for 4 months we would work a few small counties for Arizona, and that's how we got it started.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then what about the state of California? I mean, obviously you've expanded beyond those few counties in Arizona.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got a much larger operation. How did that happen? How did that occur over time?
Well, you know, as all organizations, you grow over time, and our cornerstone accounts were Pima County, which is Tucson, and Maricopa County, which is Phoenix metro area, which
Right.
is the fifth largest in the nation. We secured those in the late 80s, 86 for Pima and 92 for Maricopa, and that helped establish us with large counties. But it was many years later. It wasn't until the mid 2000s that we started tiptoeing into California. Um, the reason being there was a lot of barriers to entry, and there was a lot of competition. And you also need to. This business is all about reputation, and so you basically have to have another county willing to vouch for you to even get in the door. And fortunately, we had Maricopa County particularly singing our praises for many years, which I appreciated.
Yeah.
But that allowed us over the course of 4 or 5 years of going to conferences and getting nothing. I literally had a conversation one day with my president back in the mid 2000s about pulling out of California. I said, it's just not worth it anymore. We keep spending money and we can't get any work. But about that time, Santa Barbara allowed us in the door, and then Sacramento, and it went on from there. And now we're in about half the state. We have the voter registration system that covers about half the state, including LA County. And we print and mail for several of the counties. And we do other software work like San Bernardino County, where you guys are located. We do ballot on demand systems for them there.
Got it. All right. Well, tell us a little bit more about how your education at University of Redlands has shaped your career and worldview. I think you touched on that a little, but we all want to hear about how Redlands.
Oh, I was so hoping you weren't going to ask that question.
Oh,
I was a frustrated scientist. I wanted to be an oceanographer, and I picked Redlands actually just because I wanted to do a smaller school, and Scripps wouldn't have anything to do with me.
Oh.
And so Redlands and Willamette in Salem, Oregon were the two West Coast colleges I thought I would go visit. So I'm on the bus from Phoenix and, go through Banning, and I see Redlands 14 miles away, and we're up in the high desert still. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm just going to stay on the bus and go straight to Oregon. I don't want to be in the desert anymore. I grew up there. And of course, I dropped down. I got on campus, and I was on campus, I'd say 6 hours. I spent a whole weekend there, or 3 or 4 days in one of those orientation programs, and just knew I was home. And I never made it to Willamette until a few years ago when we were working on the state of Oregon's elections. It's the first time I actually got to Salem and walked the campus. And confirmed that I made a good choice.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, actually, it just goes to show, right, that sometimes the best laid plans are not plans.
And that really has a lot to do with it. And that actually is the rest of the story. So I was a biology major. And I like to say I discovered beer and women in the Greek process there at Redlands. And my grades started slipping. and realized I was not going to get into any sort of graduate program with, I think, a 2.2 GPA at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I literally opened up the book, and I'd been working on or the catalog, and had been working on a business minor. So I had accounting and econ classes out of the way. And my race to a degree was, how fast can I graduate? That was the only parameters. And it
Mm-hmm.
happened to be economics and business administration. So I did finish up with that. My education has definitely helped me. But the the caveat to that is I also am a classic entrepreneur, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm undaunted by failure.
That's good.
And
That's a strong trait. Yes.
that is, well, if you want to be an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, you better, because bottom
Mm-hmm.
line is you only have to succeed one more time than you fail, and you're a hero.
Mm.
So consequently, I did not take my less than stellar performance at Redlands with me as a failure. It was just an opportunity to apply myself better in the future,
That
and that
sounds
did
like it.
actually bode well for my career.
Yeah. Well, that's a great attitude.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask our audience members if they have any questions. And if you do, there is a chat function, and I should be able to see any questions that come up on the chat. I don't see any yet. So we're going to keep the conversation going about elections. I'm so curious about the kinds of printing that you do. You mentioned that you actually print the ballots themselves,
We
correct?
do. We do.
Yes.
We have a digital printing facility here. We're about 140,000 square feet total between two buildings.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, mentioned 180 full-time employees and about 200 seasonal employees.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we have to gear up and have a lot of capacity because everybody wants the election to happen on the same day. It's
Right.
it's a little challenging for us production-wise, but that's the same problem all over the country. So we're actually competing with our clients for resources, human resources, with other printers to print ballots because we all have to do it at the same time. So we're fighting over limited resources. That being said, we have 3 digital web presses and 1 digital sheet fed press. Basically, we're going from rolls of paper to finished product at a high speed. We produce about 100,000 ballots an hour, and we will
Wow.
do that 24/7 through the process here. We're anticipating we're going to mail probably 18 to 20 million vote by mail packets outbound. We'll
Wow.
probably print a total of about 40 million ballots, and that will be distributed across 20 some odd states. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
our clients are the counties. So, some states will be doing big counties, other states will be doing counties with, I think our smallest county is Bradford in Florida, and I think they have like 8,000 registered voters in the entire
Oh boy.
county.
Oh wow. So you don't
Or,
do Alpine because Alpine County in California is only about 1,200 people.
no,
You could
Alpine is
get
not on
smaller.
our list, but we do
Oh,
Nevada County, which is relatively
yeah.
small.
Yeah. Well, let's see. So we did have a question come in, so
Okay.
just to shift it just a little bit. So there's a question about putting postage on mail-in ballots, and now in California you don't actually have to do that. It does vary state by state, right? Because
Yes, it does.
some states say you have to have a postage stamp or we won't count it. Others require a postage stamp. So the person is asking, since one must put postage on the mail, sorry, it's on the mail ballots, why is the amount of postage needed printed clearly in the stamp area, or I guess why isn't it printed clearly in the stamp area so that people know how much to actually put on that ballot?
Well, that would be a very good idea, frankly. We do not personally control the artwork on the envelopes. Um, Most of the counties we work with pay for the return postage. That's the return postage guaranteed block. Um, and so that's really not an issue. In some of the states that do require postage, they do print how much, and others don't. Unfortunately, you've got layers of government that deal with elections. The federal government talks a lot, but really all they're allowed to do is fund or defund processes. And the Justice Department can apply rules if they think voting has been tampered with for segregation issues, say some of the challenges of poll taxes and things like that in the South.
Mm-hmm.
The state government, by legislature, writes laws that impact the elections. And so they can be fairly onerous or they can be very liberal. It really depends upon the state. California asserts a fair amount of statewide control, but every county is the actual process of doing the elections. So every single one of those entities have a say in how things are going. And we're kind of the tail of the dog. We can advise, but at the end of the day, our boss tells us what to do, and that's the county.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that leads to another question somebody asked about how in certain counties, I've heard some counties may let voters print their own ballots. What do you think about that? It doesn't happen.
So
It doesn't. Does that happen in California, or is that just in other states? Or
only if you're overseas military or you overseas citizens. It's called UOCAVA, which is
okay,
actually a federal law that requires that you provide a way for people that are overseas to vote. And there's several systems out there right now, ones that will allow you to download the image of your ballot. You vote your ballot, you sign it, and you scan it and you send it back, or you mail it back. But they validate your signature against your ballot. What you're giving up in that environment is your anonymity, because people can see how you voted.
mm-hmm.
So
And is
that's a choice you make.
now that's different than counties actually printing their own ballots, or is that right? That
Well, we
sounds like an
do we do a
individualized
lot of
system.
ballot on demand for in vote centers.
Right.
So if you think
Yeah.
about it, every single precinct has a different unique ballot. So
Yes.
we're doing hundreds of thousands of different versions of the ballot. The presidential race is always on the top and it'll always be there. But when you get down to the down ballot, you'll have fire districts, school districts, precinct committeeman votes, those things that are very specific to a small area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in that case, a vote center has to decide how to be able to provide all those versions to anyone that walks in the door, because you can live at the far end of the county and walk in the door and say, I live in precinct 622, and they have to
Right.
give you a ballot. So we developed years ago ballot on demand systems that integrate with the voter registration system. So when John Doe walks in the door, they key in John Doe's name and address, they collect his signature, and our system will spit out the ballot that's right for them. They get to vote it, put it in an envelope, and they're done. Um, they have some states and some counties have allowed certain voters, like handicapped voters, um, to kind of play with that system a little bit, where they're at home and they can print out their ballot. They still have to sign it. The signature is still validated. Whether they scan it back or mail it back are the two methods to get it back to the county.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
so it's very, very small numbers that do that. And I don't really see that changing anytime soon. There's always been some talk about, well, someday we'll be able to vote on our phone, and there are companies that promote that, and or pure internet voting.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge to that is always going to be, how do you recount a data file if you believe it's been corrupted?
Right. Right.
There's just no way to go back and validate. At least with paper, you can say, all right, here's the stack, count it again.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of counties that were on touchscreens back in the early 2000s have gone back to paper. Almost all of them have some sort of paper trail.
Yes. And the paper trail is really important, right?
Yeah.
If there is a dispute, they can, go back to the paper trail and compare it to what people did on screen. So I have a couple other questions that came through. One was actually the first one that came through, and it says, we've heard that traditionally voting by mail has been of greater benefit to Republican candidates than to Democratic candidates. Can you explain then why the Republican Party seems so opposed to voting by mail?
Well, I can't speak for them,
Right.
but there is Pew Center has done research several times on this topic and has emphatically stated that there is no benefit to one party over the other. Um, Traditionally, actually, I'll use Colorado as an example because they recently have completed the transition to all mail. Over the last 15 years, it was the Republicans promoting going to vote by mail in Colorado, and the Democrats were against it. I think really it is more a political talking point than any based in any reality at all. Um, you will see right now, in like we do work in Georgia. We take care of Georgia's ballots, and they're not used to vote by mail, and they got a lot of press in their primary. Fulton County in particular had a lot of challenges, mostly managing their data around getting ballots out.
Mm-hmm.
But then they took a long time to process them when they got back in. Um, the perception, I think, recently has been that Democrats, uh, in their support of minorities, which usually are more disenfranchised or challenged to get to the polls,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's been a perception by the Republican Party that if it's hard for them to vote, they just won't vote. Um, this is nothing new to this. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you go back to our history for the last 200 years, people have been trying to get the right people to vote. In
Right.
other words,
Yeah.
people
Well,
that agree with them.
it's a power struggle, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
whether it's the Dems or the reps, it's always that get the vote out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the Republicans got stuck with this narrative promoted by the president that mail-in voting is going to be bad for us,
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
the Republicans, and so they've had to step in line with that. What we're seeing though is there's a lot of Republican, uh, both at the state and national level, promoting vote by mail because they know that's the only way they're going to get reelected. So
Mm-hmm.
they're actually pushing it.
Yeah.
And as I was uh, mentioning that I was on CBS Sunday Morning yesterday, and the other one of the other people they interviewed was Kim Wyman, Secretary Wyman from Washington State, and she's a Republican in a Democratic state, and she was very strong in her comment that there is no disadvantage to one party or the other, and there is no fraud to support the argument that
Mm-hmm.
vote by mail will lead to a um,
A partisan
inappropriate
outcome.
outcome.
Right. And I
Yeah.
will add to that there was a Stanford study that just came out just a
Hmm.
couple of months ago saying the exact same thing. And it was a
Yeah.
really robust differences in differences model. But anyway, we'll go beyond that political sciencey jargon to just say the evidence exactly backs up what you're saying. So
Yep.
um, I have one more question from an audience, a couple actually. A couple of people are asking about the book, The Election Heist. And then another person, I just want to get to the more technical question. With mail-in voting, where every registered voter gets a ballot, you have all these, unused ballots. What stops those unused ballots from being misused? I think we kind of addressed that earlier when we talked about criminality and how that's a prosecutable offense. But I think the question is, what about all these unused ballots floating around? Is there any threat
Well,
of those being
clearly,
misused?
yeah, there is always some opportunity for someone to try. All I can say is I know the process for inbound mail, and you're going to have to get a lot of things right to get that to the tabulation room. The most important one is you're going to have to be able to forge that signature so exactly that it will get through our process, which frankly is really good. We use both electronic and human eye. Um, our electronic systems are the same systems the banks use to check every signature on checks, so you're trusting it with money. Um, we have human intervention on that, and if we catch anything that looks remotely uh, forged, it gets kicked out, and they do an in-depth study. They'll call the voter, they'll question them, and if it seems to be that there's something wrong there, they turn it over to the county attorney for prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, if we were talking about it takes time to get people off the voter rolls. So if you pass away or you move, it's likely that you will still get mailed a ballot if you didn't tell the county you'd moved or that your relative had died. In that environment, again, if you try to vote it, it's a crime. So does it happen? I'm sure it does occasionally. Does it get through? Very seldom. But if you get caught, it's a federal crime.
Right. Okay, so I have one. So that last question, I think one more just popped in, and I don't know if we have time for it, but the election heist, are you familiar with the book? And if so,
I'm
do you
not.
recommend it? Okay.
No,
Okay. I'm
no,
not either, but yeah,
I,
yeah. But there is one question. I don't know if we have time for it. It looks like we might be out of time. So I know alumni events might come in and cut us off, but it says, what do you think will be the result of any interference with the post office? Do you have any thoughts about that before we leave?
well, that's the hot topic at the moment. And we
Yeah.
work with a lot of people in the post office. And at the state level, which is where all the work is done, uh, you got to keep in mind, just for the Christmas season, they handle 3 billion pieces in the same time frame window as this election. At the maximum, we're asking them to deal with 100 million pieces. That's the absolute maximum.
Mm-hmm.
So they have the capacity. And even a slowdown is not going to change that. Where we're going to see, I think, the most challenges from the post office is that every state has its own rules about postmark and when you can count a ballot.
Mm-hmm.
So Arizona says you have to receive the ballot by close of polls on the county has. But they've got an arrangement with the post office which will sweep the entire facilities of any ballots at 7 p.m. on election night.
Mm.
And those are then delivered to us in Maricopa County.
Mm-hmm.
But in California, I believe they say the postmark has to be by election day.
Mm-hmm.
The rub is going to be not all pieces get postmarks.
Mm.
So it's
They
going to
have
be
to,
up to the,
yeah. And
it's
I
just an
know,
electronic process,
right. And
because
and
it,
and then there are 17. Now I know they're allowing 17 days for them to get there, but you're right. If they don't have a postmark, that's a whole nother ball of wax. Right.
so that's going to be at a state level, and they're making the rules now, or they're adjusting the rules to adjust to deal with that.
Right.
And you're going to find some states want to err on the side of, well, if we only sent you one ballot and you got it here, we want to count it. And other states will err on we're going to follow the rules exactly
Mm-hmm.
and not count anything that's not in our hands by 7 o'clock.
Right.
That's a state by state choice. That's the way it's working.
All right. Well, with that, I know we are at, I've got 11, sorry, 1:33 on my computer. So I should probably just at this point say thank you so much, even though we'd love to keep talking. You're a wealth of information, and this has just been so enjoyable. Thank you.
Well, I don't know what your constraints are, but I did allow actually an hour. So if you want to
Oh,
continue, I'm
good.
fine.
Well, good. All right. Well, then let's just go ahead and do that. I can continue. So, for anybody who needs to leave and they were expecting a half an hour, then we can just, say, okay, see you later. Thank you for joining us. But if you want to stay, we'll just continue. I think this is great. I might need a little more water, but all right. Well, great. Well, as
Well,
far
give
as
me
the
a question I can do a long-winded answer to, and you can go
right,
get
well,
some more.
just go do the do the off camera. Well, I did want to follow up a little bit with the idea that you have ballots coming in that you're obviously getting all of your information from each county, and it strikes me that there have to be mistakes every once in a while. So what happens in those cases where either the county has given you erroneous information or somehow something gets printed incorrectly? I mean, what happens to those elections or those ballots?
Well, we're required to fix them,
Right.
and that
Right.
does
Right.
happen.
Mm-hmm.
The counties are working really hard to make sure that the ballots are complete with all candidates, but quite often you'll have lawsuits that are holding up one race or the other, as the losers in the primary sometimes want to sue because they can't believe they lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can hold things up. We delay as long as we can, and then sometimes counties say, "Hey, we're going to miss our deadline. We have to go." Um, And if it's a significant error, then we reprint and remail. If someone tries to send in the first ballot that was uh, not correct, counties have ways of sorting that out. We identify through barcodes and other methodology how to identify which ballot is the accurate or the right one.
Hmm.
So if someone does try to vote two ballots, they're only allowed to vote one, and we will be able to tell which one is the accurate one.
Hmm.
It doesn't happen much, but it does happen.
Hmm.
You're never going to get away from human error, and
Exactly.
technology does fail us occasionally. If we could just talk about the starting of this meeting.
Right. Well, tell me a little bit more about technology and the sort of biggest threats to the election systems in terms of technology. An asteroid could hit, but that's not our biggest threat. What is hacking systems a much bigger threat? What do you, in your experience, what do you perceive as aside from all of the discussions we've had, which undermine faith in the election? Technologically, what are some of the issues that you see?
Well, anything that is done online is open to attack. Typically, that is voter registration, because we basically do have to do that online to some extent. Um, those voter registration systems have been penetrated in a couple of states in the last couple of years. They were not able to do anything. They didn't affect anything, but they looked around,
Mm,
and they were foreign agents. We know that we work closely with Homeland Security and the FBI.
mm,
They're in here on a regular basis. And
mm-hmm.
actually, when we had a false alarm one night, we had the city Phoenix PD in here really quick, and that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Only from the standpoint as I'm watching it on our security cameras, and they're coming in with all their guns and the dogs
Mm.
and everything. It was like,
It's
whoa.
CSI sort of
I,
stuff, right?
I feel a little safer,
Yeah.
but I'd hate to be the lone guy in here who made the mistake and set off the
Yeah.
alarm.
So it sounds like you do have some pretty heavy duty security because
Oh,
obviously,
absolutely,
right? Yeah.
absolutely. We designed and built the facility to minimize the ability of anybody to penetrate it. Our docks are all behind high steel gates and security cameras everywhere that are linked to the City of Phoenix Police Department, so they can
Mm-hmm.
actually view anything going on inside our building at any time.
Mm.
Um, we there's a lot of secure measures, badges to get in. We're checking everybody in every night, that kind of thing. The normal stuff that you would do in a high security environment.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of security measures around the actual ballots um, that help us identify what, one of the complaints was, well, the Russia's or China's going to flood the market with fake ballots. And the reality is they could come up, if they have a ballot and have time, they can look at it, they can duplicate it and mail it in, a bunch of them, but they're not going to be able to do anything with them because all the other components have to be met. We're just going to receive all these ballots and they're going to get kicked out.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll put them in a bucket, we'll give them to the FBI, and they'll go deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so while every county has different protocols, and this is where I need to caution, I know that the states and counties that I work with are well protected from fraud. I believe um, any sort of fraudulent event will be discovered, and in that event, then you can mitigate the damage. It may take time. You may have to go back and recount your ballots. You may have to double check for the security measures. Uh, if the voter registration is not matching what you were expecting, you'll have to go back and double check that. But
Absolutely.
I have serious doubts that there's any foreign or domestic entity that could change the outcome. They could
Mm-hmm.
change a few ballots here and there and get away with it maybe, but
Mm-hmm.
not in volumes necessary to impact.
Right. And, I think what most voters probably don't realize is that the votes that sort of have the most weight are those at the local level, right?
Mhm.
And those are probably the least interesting to those who are overseas.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's true. I mean, for anybody going out and voting, look, if they have time to look into the local races, those are where your vote is going to count more than have more worth than in most other places because so few votes tend to get cast at the local level, generally speaking.
Oh,
Right. So,
yes, that's absolutely true. The down ballot, as we call it, is
yep.
doesn't get any attention really, and quite a few people vote simply party line at that point.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
don't, and so one of the great advantages to vote by mail that we see is people are much more informed on how they're voting because you're
Hmm.
sitting at your kitchen table and you're thinking about it, and you're looking at the voter guide, and you're reading the literature from that candidate who's running for county supervisor
Hmm.
instead of just clicking the line. You're going, wait a minute, that guy's a jerk. I'm not going to vote for him.
Yeah.
And so I do believe that we have more informed votes through the vote by mail process than we do in the polling places. That's not a uniform thing, but it does. I know my behavior. I sit down with the books and I read and I take 2 days to vote.
Right.
I'll set it aside. I'll come back to it and hopefully I do a little better on that down ballot.
So, well, and this also brings up the idea of the windows ahead of time, and I wonder how that affects your schedule because so how far in advance do you have to start printing these ballots to get them all out? So these are sort of two questions. So one of them is how much lead time do you need in advance of the November election, given the fact that some elections are actually open for 30 days before an election, right?
Mhm.
So some elections state or some states only have elections that are open for that day, right? It's only that day or a few days before, but at least in California, we tend to send out these ballots like a whole month before,
Mhm.
and they're sitting on people's desks and in their kitchens and God knows where else. They're sitting around, and then they finally dig it out, and if you're like me, it's election day, and I'm going bringing it to the polls. So right, but there's a whole month where people are getting ready and they're educating themselves, hopefully, or at least maybe they're hearing some things about different elections and maybe ballot propositions that give them enough time to kind of gear up to actually cast that vote, all those votes. So how
So
much
one
time
of
do
the
you need?
things, well, you've got two things going on. One, you've got politics going on all the time. I mean, the absurdity that we were seeing, presidential election ads and hit pieces a year ago. It just blows my mind. But people are always trying to influence. As far as the actual election, we have to wait until the primary election is canvassed and adjudicated to make sure all those candidates are allowed on the general election ballot. And those vary, like in California, you have a March primary, so there's more time to do that. We've been begging the Secretary of State to allow us to start printing earlier. And actually, you'd have to go to the state legislature to get that permission. And
Okay.
there's just no stomach to go ask for that. But if they got their ballots, I'll brag on Santa Barbara County for a moment because they are always the first ones to get their artwork to us. And
Mm.
we actually named a conference room after them because we appreciate that so
That's
much.
great.
Because obviously, the sooner we get it, the more volume we can do, and
Hmm.
that's really going to be the pressure point for us. Is if these ballots wait to the last minute to get to us, then we
Right.
have to do the same amount of work in 3 weeks instead of 5 weeks.
Right. All right. Well, I'm getting a message from our host that we have to end at 1:45,
Okay.
which is in 1 minute. So um, I guess this is a really good time to just again say thank you so much for this conversation and for answering questions from our audience and from me. Yeah, I learned a lot today, so I hope everyone else
Great.
did too.
Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Renee, I did offer up a few books that I would encourage you to give to your students
Hmm.
before this started, um, because where I'm seeing this going is we need to change the dialogue about how our leaders lead,
Hmm.
and it's up to you to teach the young people now because they're the ones going to be doing it.
Dialogue
So.
matters. Yeah.
Um, Anyway, I gave those
Thank you.
out to you, and I'm sure you'll get that information or get emailed to you. But
Excellent.
I'd be
All
happy to
right.
help with that at any point if you want to do a follow-up.
Would love to. All right. Thank you so much.
All
All
right, my
right. Thank
pleasure.
you, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate you being with us today and for learning more about elections.